Well, hello and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our webinar on the subject of data governance and compliance. It's great to see you all here. We're delighted to have you with us for the next hour or so to hear from some experts on this important topic. So just by way of a quick introduction, I suppose from myself, I'm Darren Clark, and I'm Head of Customer Success here at OpenSky. Who are we? Well, OpenSky, we are an AI, automation, and a data specialist. We're Irish owned and operated. Quite a few of you will already know us. We're founded over 20 years ago. We're based here in Naas in County Kildare. We do specialize in working with the public sector, and we have quite a wide footprint. So you'll see some of the people that we work with. In fact, I know some of you are on the call, so welcome to our customers and non-customers alike. It's great to have you on board. So I suppose opening remarks, I mean, data governance is a critical part of risk and compliance frameworks for organizations, both public and private. And it's probably fair to say that Ireland is at the epicenter of the drive for good data governance. There's good reason for that. So if you look at sort of recent history, between January 2023 and January 2024, there were almost 7,000 personal data breaches reported to the Data Protection Commissioner in Ireland. That's 20% up on the previous year. And what does 7,000 mean? Is that a big number? Well, let me give you some context for that. We're actually comparable with much larger countries. The UK, for example, our nearest neighbour, had 9,000. In fact, it might surprise some people to know that actually we're one of the largest. We're ahead of France, Spain, Italy, Netherlands. So, you know, it's probably no surprise because Ireland is, of course, a global tech hub with many of the giants headquartered here, you know, and that's well known. But there's a robust level of enforcement in place in Ireland to our data protection regime. Ireland is actually at the very top of the league, for example, when it comes to imposing GDPR fines. It seems incredible, but actually Ireland is 4 times larger in terms of the number of fines, the size of the fines imposed than our nearest, which would be Luxembourg. The largest fine ever recorded for GDPR breach was imposed by the Irish regulator. It was 1.2 billion on Meta, and that's last year, and that's a well-known example. But domestic organisations are not immune either. Bank of Ireland was fined 750,000 euros last year. So I guess I'm sure the audience here appreciates the importance of data governance. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't have joined the webinar. But data governance doesn't get a huge amount of media coverage. I guess AI is a sexier topic. It's more of a draw. But I think what people need to remember is that AI is not immune from poor data. And all of us have heard the old saying, rubbish in, rubbish out. Well, that still applies, even in the world of AI. Deploying AI without robust data governance creates very high risks, unacceptable risks for most organizations. So being able to move forward into the world of AI is as much about, you know, being data ready as about the shiny new technology. So I suppose opening remarks here, you know, 2 key messages for you before we introduce the speakers. The first one is that poor data governance creates very significant risks, both regulatory and compliance risks. We've talked about the fines and the breaches, reputational risks, and operational risks, because lack of data governance will and does become a barrier to making progress that's available through innovation and implementing new technology. So that's the first point. And the second point is the flip side is that strong governance actually de-risks your organization. And that's a key point for today. Strong governance de-risks your organization. It builds stakeholder confidence, which is what we're all about doing. and it actually becomes an enabler for progress. Indeed, we ourselves are working on data governance projects with some of our own customers, who I think some are on this call. I should probably call out. There's people there from Dublin City Council, Health Research Board, and the Department of Children Integration. So, a lot is happening here already. These are big challenges, but the good news is help is available. Today, as I said, we're going to bring together an expert panel who I'm going to introduce now in a moment as I talk through the agenda. Just a couple of housekeeping rules. You'll notice your microphones are muted. That's normal in a webinar, but we do want to encourage questions. We're going to have a Q&A at the end. So while you're listening to the presenters, what I'd ask, if you have a question, then put it in the Q&A facility, which you'll see just at the top of your screen. And do put your name on it, because if we don't get around them all, well, we might be able to come back to you. Okay, so the agenda. Well, first, our first speaker is from McCann Fitzgerald, one of Ireland's leading law firms, working with government departments and obviously well known, need no introduction. So we're going to be joined by Paul Lavery, a partner from McCann Fitzgerald's Technology and Innovation Group. Paul will give us a 20-minute overview of the key things that you need to know around the regulatory and compliance environment. Our second speaker then is William Flanagan. William is one of the owners and co-founders of OpenSky and is Director of Technology here at the company. Now, William has been instrumental in working with public sector organisations across the UK and Ireland, bringing transformational solutions over many years. We're 20 years in business, so a long record there. William will talk about Microsoft Fabric as a key data governance platform. William will also share with us later in the presentation an important case study which brings all of the various pieces together. We're also joined by Paul Norris from Microsoft. And Microsoft's data and AI function has a key role in Ireland in empowering public sector and indeed private to build better data governance. So Paul will be speaking to us about Microsoft Purview, another key tool in data governance. So without any further ado, I'm going to ask Paul Lavery to step up there, and I'll hand over to you, Paul. Welcome.
Thanks very much, Darren. So what I'm going to do now, everybody, is I'm going to share my screen. So can everybody see that?
Let's come up there now, Paul. Yep.
Okay, so as Darren mentioned, what I'm going to talk about today is the regulatory environment, or the main regulatory environment when it comes to data. And if you cast your minds back, for those of you who believe in remembering bad dreams, you'll remember that the GDPR back in 2018 brought a huge swathe of work and pressure on public sector and private sector bodies in terms of trying to get ready and comply with the GDPR. And it didn't just finish in 2018, it then kept going and is an ongoing compliance obligation. What we now have, if you forward fast to 2024, is not just the GDPR, but a plethora of other legislation, both current and impending, which have a variety of obligations in respect of data management and data usage. And so what I'm going to do today is to look at that legislation and give a quick whistle-stop tour through some of their main implications. So I'm going to look at the EU AI Act, the NIS2 directive, the GDPR, the EU Data Act, and the Data Governance Act. So, as I said, back in 2018, we had a scenario where we thought it was bad enough trying to comply with the GDPR. Now we've got all of these other things coming down the line as well. So the first thing I'm going to look at is the EU AI Act. It entered into force recently on the 1st of August 2024, and it will apply in stages from the 2nd of February 2025 until the 2nd of August 2026. What's its main focus? Well, its focus is on the safe development and the subsequent usage of AI systems and the data that is inputted into those systems. Its approach is to take a risk-based approach. So it divides AI systems into 4 different levels of risk. Unacceptable risk, which will be prohibited fully. High risk, limited risk, and another section which is just simply minimal or no risk. And the obligations differ depending on the risk levels, and unless it's unacceptable risk, in which case it's just a banned AI system. And the obligations which are imposed by the EU AI Act are imposed on providers, which are the developers of the systems, and obligations on the deployers and users of those AI systems. And so the primary relevance to the public sector will be the obligations that are imposed on the deployers and the users. And there's a number of key potential obligations that are worthy of note. So depending on which category your AI system falls into, if your AI system is, for example, considered to be a high risk system, mainly because it could have a high risk for individuals based on the decision-making power of those AI systems, you may need proper technical and organizational measures to ensure the proper use of the system. You might need proper human oversight. You might need proper controls in relation to the input of data. You might need to carry out data protection impact assessments. And a key obligation will also be transparency, ensuring that members of the public are aware that AI is in operation, and that will be particularly where an AI system interacts directly with natural persons. An example of that would be chatbots. And then there may also be, in addition to DPIAs, an obligation to carry out what's known as a fundamental rights impact assessment, which basically looks and feels very like a DPIA. But even if it's not a high risk system, and you've decided that it's more of a limited risk system, there will still be certain transparency obligations to ensure that people are aware that AI is being utilized. There may also be a need to watermark AI produced content and output, and what's probably a lot of publicity at the moment, the need to disclose where images are deep fakes. So we know that the EU AI Act came in on the 1st of August 2024, but we know that its obligations commence from 2025 right through to 2026. But the question is then, look, what should I do today? Well, one of the first things you should do is audit your current use of AI systems and verify whether they are AI systems. But what you might also do is look further down the road and identify what your plan is in relation to future use of AI systems. Because I think it's fair to say that most bodies are either maybe already using AI systems or will be using them. If you're in the unlucky position that you've identified an AI system that will be prohibited, you need to make plans to cease using that AI system. Darren came up with a very good comment, I thought, earlier in the session when he talked about rubbish in, rubbish out. And I think it's really important that we audit what data we have and what data might be used in AI systems. And once you've identified the categories and the sources of the data, the next thing is to look at a general compliance measure. So you need to ensure that that data that's being utilized in AI systems is compliant with intellectual property, in particular copyright law, and isn't being used in breach of those laws. You need to ensure that there are no issues from a confidentiality or data protection obligation. In the context of data protection, one might wonder, for example, did you let people know that you were going to collect and use their data for this purpose? Do you have a legal basis, etc.? You should seek to ensure that there's no unauthorized data sharing. And more generally, from a data governance perspective, it's really important to ensure high quality, reliable data for effective decision making and use of AI. Next thing I'm going to talk about is the NIS2 directive. So NIS1 has been around for a long time and has imposed various obligations on what are currently known as operators of essential services. But NIS2 will replace NIS1, and the transposition deadline is the 17th of October 2024, so less than a month away. And by transposition, what I mean by that is that there needs to be Irish legislation which will implement this European directive. And it's proposed that the Irish legislation will be the National Cyber Security Act 2024. At present, we have heads of bill for that. And what that act will do is will apply to essential entities and important entities. And these are the categories of entities described in the annexes to the NIS2 directive. And that includes such entities as central and regional public administration bodies, and also bodies in various critical sectors, which will include a lot of public bodies. The main thing that NIS2 is designed to achieve is to ensure a high level of security of network and information systems. And I'm conscious the main purpose of today isn't to look at matters from purely a security perspective, but to look at matters from a data management perspective. And so the main obligations are security, incident notification, supply chain risk management, because your suppliers, you're only as good as your own suppliers are, and you might have amazing measures in place, but if your suppliers don't, that may still prejudice you. And appropriate assessment and audits of compliance. And from a data management perspective, what's going to be very important and is already very important for preparation for NIS2 is to understand what data you have, where you have it, and why you have it. Because it's only if you've carried out that exercise that you can engage in a risk assessment and a data hygiene assessment. There may be some data, for example, that you decide you don't want. There may be some data stored in certain systems that shouldn't be on those systems because they're not secure enough. And then for preparation for NIS2, robust data governance and data management practices are also important, because with those appropriate governance and management practices, it enables you to identify the range and sensitivity of an attack and to meet the NIS2 24-hour reporting window. It's very difficult to engage in a report of a big cyber attack within 24 hours if you're not really sure what data has been impacted, where it was in your systems, and the level of risk with that data. And, you know, as I mentioned, that's essential to enable a swift and effective response to cybersecurity incidents. What's also very important, just from a risk management perspective, is to have appropriate policies in place. And these are appropriate policies that are shared with and socialized with your staff, and they're in particular business continuity and other appropriate policies. The next one I wanted to talk about was GDPR. And you'll see what I've said there is that it hasn't gone away. And I mentioned this because for those of us involved in GDPR, it's almost quite funny that other people have nearly decided that maybe GDPR is old hat. And because of all of this other legislation is coming down the tracks, that somehow GDPR has gone away. Well, it certainly hasn't. And I think Darren mentioned in his introduction the level and the number of fines that are emanating from the Data Protection Commission. And as he mentioned, the Data Protection Commission has levied the most and the highest level of fines in the whole of the European Union. And obviously a lot of that is to do with having the big tech companies in Ireland, but it's not limited to those tech companies, and public sector bodies need to be aware of that, albeit that the fines can be less when it's the public sector. And I mentioned that we need to keep an eye on this because I think the DPC is becoming even more proactive in its regulation. We've seen it in relation to data security incident reports, where we get a lot more queries from the DPC after filing those reports. By way of reminder, I know I'm talking to people who already know this, the focus of the GDPR is clearly on personal data. Its obligations relate to the collection and use and disclosure of that data, which we know is processing. There's a variety of obligations: transparency, identifying legal bases for processing, having appropriate data security measures, complying with data subject rights requests, having a restriction on retention so we know that data needs to be deleted at a certain point in time, and having an appropriate record of processing activities where we've identified our categories of data, where it is, why we have it, and how long we keep it. It's impossible to comply with any of those obligations without appropriate data hygiene and data governance. If you don't know what you have, where you have it, and why you have it, it's just impossible to comply with access requests. It's impossible to deal with data security obligations, and it's absolutely impossible to comply with restrictions on data retention and to ensure appropriate deletion of data when it's no longer needed. So in addition to all of that, we need to document and evidence compliance, because when the DPC comes knocking on your door, they will look for your data policies. They will see to what extent you have those policies and you're compliant with them and how you operationalize those policies. And they will consider things like an appropriate data governance framework. And so if you weren't depressed enough at this stage with all of the other legislation I'm talking about, there is other relevant data legislation as well. One area that's relevant is, or one piece of legislation that's relevant is known as the EU Data Act. And that relates to both personal and non-personal data. It's designed to enhance the safe and free movement of data, and it will apply from the 12th of September 2025, with some provisions of the EU Data Act applying at a later date. And insofar as today's seminar is focused on public sector bodies, it's primarily relevant to public sector bodies that require access to private sector data where there's an exceptional need, and it has various obligations set out in there. So the EU Data Act is also relevant, and once again, in terms of complying with this, it will involve an analysis of what data you have already, but also what data you might need in exceptional circumstances from the private sector, and giving good consideration to that. In addition to that, we've also got the EU Data Governance Act. That's already in force. It's been in force since the 24th of September 2023, so a year ago yesterday, and it's relevant to public bodies that share certain data. It's designed to be a framework for enhancing trust in voluntary sharing of data, and it regulates the reuse of publicly held data. One potential complication with the EU Data Governance Act is that we've also got Irish Indigenous legislation known as the Data Sharing and Governance Act, and these two pieces of legislation don't necessarily fully mesh and marry, which can cause some complications. So that's really a whistle-stop tour through a variety of the different pieces of data legislation that is either already in force or that is coming down the track. The overlap in respect of all of that legislation is the need to ensure that you know what data you have, where you have it, why you have it, that you've got the appropriate governance framework in place, that you've got appropriate policies, and that you're also aware of the systems that are relevant to the storage and utilization of that data. So I'm just going to come out of that now, and I know there might be questions at the end.
Paul, thanks very much. I have to say, very, very interesting. Very, you managed to cover 5 separate pieces of legislation in 15 minutes, which is no mean feat. Thanks very much. I mean, it really is. It really shines a light on the importance of data governance, because the thing that struck me, one of the big points you made towards the end, was that you said that it's impossible to comply with all of this framework, EU and national legislation, without having the right data governance tools in place. So That's a really salient point. Thanks so much for a great presentation. I'm going to ask William to join us now, because William's going to talk about what some of those tools and frameworks might look like. Welcome to the stage, William. I'll hand over to you there. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Darren. Great to be here and to talk to all of you today. So I'm going to talk about, I'm going to focus on Microsoft Fabric for my first part here. Hopefully everybody's seeing my screen there at the moment. So I'll proceed on the basis that you are.
Yep, that's fine, William.
Okay, so Microsoft Fabric and how that represents the Keystone in terms of modern data governance. First of all, I want to thank Paul for an excellent exposition there on the various regulatory environment and challenges that exist there. I found it really interesting. I've got a couple on the screen here myself, NIS2, the Artificial Intelligence Act, and GDPR. And I guess these do represent quite a, one could look at it in a couple of ways, the burden of data governance and having to put these systems in place. I actually prefer to think of it as an opportunity that in doing this, it really does unlock the huge potential of the data within the organizations that we're all working in. But maybe just to increase the focus on challenges for a moment, if we consider our current data landscapes, that probably most of the organizations that I've seen in the public sector over the years, oftentimes we're working in fragmented and siloed environments where the tool sets, that it could be various different types of technology stacks. There could be data that's siloed in individual divisions within a department or individual locations that have trouble sharing information with each other, as well as all the other compliance overhead that goes with that. And in order to bring these things together so that we can drive things like insight and governance, that can often involve doing integration projects and then doing it again and again to bring these different data sets together from that kind of fragmentation landscape. Those are slow and costly things to implement, and really do reduce the time to insight in these in this type of scenario. And further to that, the scalability just isn't there. If we have to keep doing this every time there's a new data set or there's a new system or we've got a new location or a new function, which happens all the time in the public sector, as we know, that the ability to scale out our data environment in that scenario becomes really limited, and all of this leads to higher operational costs and greater difficulties in terms of being compliant and in terms of data governance. So that's why we're here to talk about some technology. Okay, so we're going to talk first of all about Microsoft Fabric and its role as a unified data platform in the era of AI. So firstly, Microsoft Fabric. So I'm going to talk about this probably from a couple of personas, like the persona of people who are data owners and who are responsible for data governance, people who might be creators or consumers of data, and who are coming from the backdrop that we've been discussing in the first part of this webinar. So what does a data platform, a unified data platform, enable us to do? Well, firstly, if we look at the Microsoft Fabric, it's got this intelligence data foundation upon which everything is built. So within here we have tools like we have tools like a Data Factory, which automates data integration across the multifarious different systems that we might have within our organization. Data engineering enables us to build pipelines to actually bring that data together, to cleanse it, to properly put it into, you would say, shared areas like a data warehouse, which could be centralized structures for analytics that are available across the organization. Quite often, if we've built up our data sets over a number of years, there's intense value latent within the data, and machine learning and other things like that can really unlock that value using data science. we may be operating in a scenario where we've got, lots of sensors. We might be responsible for traffic or things like that, and we need to know real time what's happening, and we can turn those data sets into real time intelligence. Power BI is a technology that a lot of our customers here are using and are very familiar with over the course of a number of years. And this is really where the ability to visualize data through interactive reports really comes into its own. And then with Data Activator in Fabric, we have the ability to trigger automated actions and from insights that might occur from various data patterns or scenarios that occur across my data set. Now, by having this foundation here, this enables us to operate in an environment where we have that fragmentation, we have information coming from those different technologies, different data sets, and then enables us to bring it together. As we all know, there's been such a huge investment in AI in Microsoft these days, and it's particularly in Microsoft Fabric. So in terms of productivity, that technology exists here to enable us to do these things really quickly. Foundationally speaking, these all sit on a piece of technology called OneLake. Think of it as your OneDrive for all things data. So we can have our structured and our unstructured data sitting in this single data foundation where it's available for all of these individual platforms. Furthermore, on the theme of unified data platform, the experience itself is unified. So if you're familiar with Microsoft 365 for all your different Office apps, it's a similar paradigm here as SaaS experience. The security and governance, which I'm going to come on to in a couple of minutes, is unified. The storage and compute, the management of the payments and the consumption and so on is all simplified, and the actual ability to see your organization within a single business model, which we're going to deal with quite a bit over the course of the rest of the webinar. So I'm just going to talk for another slide here on the features of Microsoft Fabric and the unified data platform itself. So this, again, coming from that scenario where we have these fragmented data sources, this enables us to bring it together in one complete platform where everything is unified within our SaaS environment and where we can apply our security and governance in one place. So the lake-centric concept, the fact that we have our one lake there where we're unifying all our data together and we can have one copy of the truth, that's available at every section of the pipeline. The concept of democratization or federated analytics, if we want to call that, the ability to empower every business user. These are the people who are familiar with the data and with the business domains. They're doing it every day and should really be the people who are gaining those insights and driving those actions within our organizations. Again, and that solves another fragmentation problem where, for example, we often have organizations that have a bottleneck in a data science department who are responsible for generating insight across the entire organization. And then AI powered. And the boost to productivity that many of us will have seen or may have seen thus far for AI tools and AI-driven insights. And I think, some of our own customers on this webinar will have seen some examples of that, where we're doing things like, if you can imagine, very document-heavy processes where we're able to use AI engines to take that information and really remove large amounts of grunt work and integrate that information back into core systems within the organization so that we're really using artificial intelligence to scale out productivity and bring that back into the organization. One of the things about everything that I've just said is that if we're going to have data governance and compliance, and if we want things like artificial intelligence, and if we want to be able to be compliant with all the things that Paul talked about, this is where Fabric is hugely important. To be able to do any of that, you must have your unified data platform. You need to understand and resolve issues in one place. Your data quality and your data integrity. So the fact that we're using the same tool set to bring this information together so that we know that the cleansing of information is automatically being done and that the integrity and the lineage of the information can be tracked at all points in time and that it's not being done manually through Excel and being copied and so on is hugely important. Roles and access management getting implemented in one place across the entire piece so that if you're a Microsoft organization, for example, you'd have this integrated with your Microsoft Entra ID. and that you can implement your security policies across the board. And your policies and processes are critical to what Paul was talking about. Be it related to NIS2 or GDPR, or whether it's to do with your obligations under the Artificial Intelligence Act as you start to roll out AI automations. And within that, I think that one of the really important things to say about the Unified Data Platform is how tightly integrated it is with the topic of our next speaker, which is Microsoft Purview and the governance platform and the power that that brings to data stewards and to other personas within the organization. And perhaps what I'll do, Darren, is hand back to you to introduce that next section of the webinar.
Great. Thanks very much, William. Well, first of all, thanks for an excellent summary there on Microsoft Data Fabric. The theme of unified and integrated really comes across there and leads us nicely onto the topic of Purview, which I'm going to ask Paul Norris to take control and present on. Paul Norris from Microsoft. Welcome, Paul. Hi.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for your time. So as they mentioned, my name is Paul Norris. I'm a data and AI solution specialist here in Microsoft Ireland. What I'm going to do for the next couple of minutes is just give you an overview of a second technology after Fabric that William introduced there, and this one is called Microsoft Purview. Purview is Microsoft's umbrella term for all of our technologies that align with governance, information protection, compliance, and that kind of space. And really, the best way to think about it is probably with everything our first speaker outlined around kind of the regulation, compliance legislation that needs to be considered, and fabrics and technologies like Fabric that William mentioned, where you now have the ability to very easily centralize and integrate your data so that it's more easy to use than ever before. Purview then sort of becomes the way in which you can start to take that legislation and compliance requirement and then start to find a way to implement it in the technology so that you can see where your data sets are, what types you have, and how you're maybe enforcing things in the technology that help you to maintain all of that compliance. So from a Microsoft perspective, the approach that we kind of enable our customers to take is one that would generally be called kind of a federated data governance model. And really what that means is we kind of have this concept of you have your data centrally, it may be managed and supported by an IT or an analytics team, but ultimately the data has some value in the business areas that are using it or in the different departments. And they have a very strong role in kind of defining what the data is, how it should be used, correctly governed, etc. So most of our tools and products are really trying to enable this kind of model of you can have a centralized control platform, but you have an ability to allow groups to be somewhat self-service when it comes to ensuring their compliance and feeding back into it. So all of our kind of technology allows the data that is usually coming from systems that are more tech-based or application-based to be grounded in the kind of business concepts that are important so that you understand how to govern them correctly. We do also, of course, have new generative AI capabilities in here that kind of help you to classify and identify data. So we're bringing along the latest technology as well to make sure that you can do this efficiently. When it comes to data governance, one angle we do like to show as well is it's not all kind of about being just compliant and ensuring that you're not exposing any risks. There are advantages with regards to efficiency in the business and even the ability to kind of explore your data, discover it, and figure out where it might exist and identify new opportunities. So we do like to look at kind of the data governance side as one being ensuring you're compliant, but two, actually enabling the business to actually get more value out of the data and to use it more responsibly and also then just maybe find new value in it that wasn't easy to get into before. So there are benefits in kind of going down the governance route just beyond the kind of compliance and regulatory aspects as well. I mentioned that kind of federated model. There are other ways to approach it, right? But the big benefit of the one, as I mentioned, is you are trying to bring like departments and end users along with you on this journey. It's not just something that's kind of being implemented in the center and forced upon groups. Generally, when that approach is taken, you kind of tend to get a little bit of a pushback, or maybe groups feel like this is being imposed on them and maybe it's not actually allowing them to do what they need to do. So we take the approach of kind of bringing everyone along with us, where you can set up all your kind of data connectors and have the whole data estate mapped and classified. And then the business areas can have maybe this kind of a role like a data steward, who might be a local local SME in a particular area of data, and they can be responsible for kind of keeping the data set up to date, cataloging it, defining what the terms mean, etc. So we're really trying to go for this collaborative approach to really embed it in the organization and ensure everyone's brought on the journey. If we look then kind of what this would look like at scale, like when you have all your kind of governance policies in place and all your data is kind of plumbed into the system, what you're really trying to do is you're trying to build a little bit of a feedback loop where when you identify some piece of data that you potentially have a use for, you go through a process of just having a thoughtful way of onboarding that to the system, making sure it's cataloged and classified correctly. You define what the use of that data is and who can and can't do what with it. And then once you actually have all that in place, you allow individuals and groups to go and actually create new products, analyze it, gain insights, and they can feed that back into the system, and that just enhances it even further. So you're trying to get these kind of ongoing incremental improvements and unlocking new value so that basically over time, the whole system kind of becomes a means for the business to be more efficient and use their data better. And it's not seen as anything that's kind of holding back or imposing any restrictions on anybody. When you have the kind of ability to bring together kind of the business side that might understand the data or might be the stewards of the data, and then the end users. In our technology, what we try and do is we try and define the concept of data products. And at a high level, what that is it's trying to bring some asset you have in your organization into a kind of a grouping whereby if somebody wants to do analysis or get insights on topic X, they can come into our catalogs, they can say, hey, I'm looking for information to help me answer question Y, and then they have a list of products. And those products have been properly designed by the SMEs and the stewards in the business. So it has a glossary behind it that defines what all the columns and the terms in the data sets might be. You have OKRs that might be monitoring the quality of the data. And if there are any critical data elements, which is kind of then more on the maybe personally identifiable fields or particular fields in your organization that you know are sensitive that might lean on DPIA being required, etc., you can have those automatically detected in data sets so that if people are coming in wanting to start and work on data, they can actually see a summary of that data product, what it contains, any kind of cautions that they might need to be aware of around it, or potentially even that they might require a DPIA to go do some work on it. And you can just have that in a catalog where people can kind of come in and browse that so that they're getting a very early view on maybe how to stay compliant if they want to do a particular piece of work. As mentioned by other speakers, with the kind of uptake now of generative AI in particular technology, it does kind of mean that individuals wanting to build solutions like this have to be a little bit more thoughtful on when you have a generative AI use case and you're potentially connecting that to your own data, just being aware of what is in that data set, where did it come from, what rights do you have in order to actually build particular use cases on it. Systems like Purview help you to understand if you do have AI use cases you want to explore, what data do you have, what is the grounds in which you gathered it, what rights do you have to build things on it, and is there any sensitivity around what might be in it. So by kind of doing the work of kind of implementing this technology in your estate, you kind of then accelerate or unlock the ability to kind of get AI use cases and value from that data because you do a lot of the work in advance on making sure everything is kind of compliant and classified. So that's really our goal when it comes to the kind of the Purview suite of products, right? It's just trying to set up the right foundations to help you then unlock new innovation and use cases. Our approach really is to kind of look at it both from like a defense and a kind of responsible offense kind of side of things. So back to what I said, we're trying to ensure all the kind of security, compliance, and risk management aspects that you may kind of initially think about as a reason to go down the governance route. But really what we're trying to do is saying, look, that's kind of the foundation, the basics, right? You have to do that to ensure compliance. But in doing so, it actually unlocks also a whole load of value and potential and new ways of looking at your data that might generate new business value or ways for your organization to operate. So we're really kind of taking two sides to it. It's not just about the kind of protection and defense piece. We're also trying to bring in new capabilities and unlock some value in the organization. just drilling a little bit more into that kind of umbrella topic of like Purview being our kind of governance compliance suite of tools and products. It does span quite a wide range, right? So it has features that would help you in kind of the document side of the world. So in that kind of M365 Office, Word, Excel side, but then also in the data governance side, it also has all the tools you'd require to manage your data estate. So you can scan your data sources that you might be using in your platform. You can scan Fabric itself to track how the data is being processed once it goes into Fabric, maybe then going through to seeing what Power BI reports the data might be using in. And you can also put sensitivity labels on data sets if you want to be very careful on who maybe accesses data and then potentially, you know, goes and uses it for other things downstream. So it really is trying to give you an end-to-end way to look all the way from where you might be gathering the data, seeing what kind of classification categories it might fit into, all the way through to the end uses of it. So when we talk about Fabric and the concept of data governance, basically our approach is kind of three prongs. One, we try and map your entire data estate, right? So what we see generally is, especially with platforms like Fabric, they become the place where the data is centralized into and all your analytics and insights can be generated there. But it's very important to be aware also of what the sources of that data might have been before they arrived in Fabric. So with Purview Data Governance, you can connect to those sources and you can set up regular scans just to keep an eye to see if there's anything changing in those. That might mean you may need to update your governance policies maybe as the data goes through into Fabric. So maybe there's an update to an application and someone adds a more sensitive field, or maybe a data accidentally ends up in a table that you really don't want to be bringing in through to the analytics platform. You can have all that automated, so it's keeping a check on what you're bringing in via your pipelines just to make sure there's nothing accidentally brought through. So if we look just broadly under the hood of the Purview Data Governance product, we give you the ability to do what we call data discovery. So that's what I mentioned there about like the ability to kind of scan your estate, find out what sources you have, see what's in them. And this is all automated. So you can point to that a database across multiple technologies, Oracle, SQL, etc., even across multiple clouds. And you can have it scan that and give you a report back to say, okay, I have this many tables, and in those tables are these columns, and I think I've automatically detected that there's email addresses in this one, and you know, people's names in this one, and other sensitivity classifications it can put on it. Once you have those kind of, you know, maps created, that then allows you to start to apply your own kind of business concepts over those data. So you can start to go, okay, well, look, that's a HR system, or that's a marketing system, or that's a citizen-facing system. And then you can start to put different kind of classifications on what that means and assign business owners to it. You can even go so far as using Purview as a way by which if someone in your organization wants to get access to a data set to read it, they can go into Purview and click an access request, and that generates a workflow whereby the data owner might get notified and they can make a decision on whether or not the use case the person has is appropriate and they want to grant them access. And finally, also with the tooling, it allows you to do data estate health, right? So one of the things that can be quite important is the quality of your data that you're maybe bringing through your Fabric platform. Is that changing in maybe the sources that you're extracting it from? And should you be alerted if, for example, maybe new fields appear, or maybe they're not being fully completed, or now fields are not of as high a quality as they should be? You can set automated alerts that kind of get checked when the scans are run. And maybe that gives you an update to say, you know what, maybe the data you're getting for that analytic workload has now changed, and you might want to go back to the owner just to check to see, is there something we need to improve to make sure what you're reporting off it is accurate and there aren't any issues in the data sets. Finally, then, just to emphasize again that kind of tight integration with Fabric that William mentioned. So with Fabric being your platform where you kind of will now centralize your data and generate your analytics and your insights, it has a whole load of compliance and even governance tools out of the box. So it is best of breed straight away, even when you switch it on. But then when you want to really get into understanding how do you map those legislative concepts and regulations over Fabric, but also the sources and potentially the things that are sitting on top of Fabric where the analysis is happening, you then add Purview to that, and that starts to then broaden your horizon, and you can really do end-to-end mapping. And with the entire suite, you can do everything from like data retention policies. That's a very big one, especially in public sector. If you have data sets where you should only be retaining them for a certain period of time, you can set those policies up in Purview, and once it sees a data of a particular type, it can flag for you that maybe maybe we've data sitting here that's beyond the retention policy, and what would we like to do about it? We can also put classification labels on your data sets, so you can in your organization define what might be internal or confidential or highly confidential, and you can have certain kind of restrictions applied then based on a data set type. That might mean, for example, if somebody analyzes this and creates a Power BI report, that should never be shared outside the organization, even in a Teams call or on an email. You can prevent that from happening right down at the data set, raw data set level. You can label that, and anything that's created off it, then that enforcement follows all the way through to the end user tools as well. So between Fabric plus the Purview combination, you kind of really get the full breadth of tooling that you might need in this space. So I think with that, I'm going to hand back over to Darren, I think, maybe just to introduce the next topic. Thank you.
Paul, thanks very much indeed. That was really interesting. It's good to see, Fabric and Purview, and how they work together. And something that really I liked what you said about the fact that it's not just about remaining compliant, but it's equally about getting benefits to the organization, which I think is definitely something we would emphasize to people. And a real link back to Paul Lavery's point as well about knowing your data. So to bring it all together, I think it would be very useful now for us to see a case study, and that's what William is going to present. So I'll just call William back to our virtual podium here to present a case study, just to bring all of these tools together. William.
Okay, thanks, Darren, and thanks very much, Paul. So just to tie things together, what we'd like to do is talk about a customer that we've been working with, and how we've used the technologies that we've been talking about today to address some of the challenges that we've been talking about today. So the customer that we've been working with is in the healthcare sector. They're a healthcare provider with multiple locations, and one that's been going through quite a lot of consolidation in recent times, and new sites being added through that consolidation. And within that, there's this kind of legacy overhang of that kind of fragmentation that I spoke about at the beginning, and a real need within that for the capability to do, because things are changing so rapidly within this group and within this organization, to be able to drive decision making through data. So in terms of the technology that was in place, because the organization in question was coming from, let's say, sites that were standalone and are now part of a wider group, there's no, or hadn't been historically, any overarching enterprise architecture. And we have, for example, teams working across, we might have, say, HR teams working across different sites that really struggle to work together in terms of sharing information around staff. Likewise for people dealing with patients, and the ability to share information in that way. There's an urgent need for joined up business planning. So there's a lot of, given that we're talking about an organization going through quite a lot of change, that again, reinforcing the need for that unified data platform that can drive both governance, but also can do the things like the data discovery capabilities that Paul was talking about, and that we can drive our business domains across the entire organization, regardless of what the function or the site is that we're talking about. And that is really important for doing decision support at a top level, which is going to, again, for an organization that's going through a lot of change, to be able to make those group level decisions, and also to be able to federate the insight, or the capability to drive the insight down to either sites or across all sites for a particular function, such as HR, becomes hugely important. And then obviously the data governance risks coming into a project like this with that fragmentary environment obviously presents a lot of data governance risks, which we talked about at the beginning. For example, with this particular organization, while there was an appreciation of how AI could assist in automation and in driving productivity in certain areas of the business, there was certainly a reluctance to have anything to do with that, given the fragmentary scenario that they found themselves in. Just in terms of the technology that was in place, so for example, we had multiple sites within the organization, and there would be different SaaS platforms, infrastructure as a service. There'd be on-premise solutions, but for example, we might have finance sitting in Azure here. It'd be on-prem in other parts of the organization. One might have a SaaS HR solution, another might have an on-prem. There'd be different solutions for patient records. And in one case, we had Salesforce as a CRM, and in another site there was Dynamics on-premise. So quite a lot of information that's kind of siloed and spread across different organizations. And while there is and was an enterprise architecture initiative to consolidate this, that's a multi-year process to actually roll out systems that are being consolidated across all these different locations and functions. We can't wait for that project like that to finish with something that's going to take multiple years before we be able to drive a unified data platform. We need it sooner, and we need to be able to drive those decision support mechanisms sooner. So the solution to that then was using the 2B model that we implemented, which was Microsoft Fabric and Purview, and the technologies that we've been talking about here to roll out the first phase of this particular project. So just without getting too heavy on solution architecture, but if we look at our data sources from the various different sites on the left, we're again feeding these through pipelines for data ingestion into this one lake foundation, and upon that, on top of that, we're sitting Microsoft Purview for data and governance security. So as Paul mentioned there, tracking the metadata as it's coming in, so now we know where things are coming from before we even start our analytics, and that we're tracking that metadata at every stage through the chain, whether it's collecting the information, whether it's adding shape to it. We have this concept of the medallion architecture here, so we're bringing in the information in its rawest form into our bronze area. We're adding structure to it and cleansing it here in our silver area, and then we have our gold platform here. So the items that make it in here are then available to our end users, our consumers of our data, or the people who are going to create the insight, the people who have that federated analytics capability, or these consumers who are going to come in and browse the data catalog that's created there through Purview. And again, once these solutions are put in place, what we have here then is the capability to do things like creating shortcuts so that we can share this information to CRM projects that are rolling out, or to Power Platform apps that are rolling out also. And I guess one of the really important things is that this is phase one, right? And this looks like quite a large initiative, and I guess that is true. However, each step of the chain here that we're looking at, whether it's the collection of data or it's the data engineering, the pipelines using Spark or whatever technology we decide to use, these are all well-established tool sets and well-established architectures and patterns that lend themselves to agility. And agility is something that I would say is really important here. Being able to do a project like this in stages, choose what it is we're going to do first, and roll out elements of the functionality in ways that are going to work for the organization. And in the case of this particular organization, having done this exercise, where does that get us to? So at this point now, we've mitigated significantly some of the risks that were highlighted by our first speaker, Paul from McCann Fitzgerald, where data governance risk, by being able to bring all the information together into one solidified platform, that we now know what we're collecting, where it is, how we're going to manage it, and so on. Obviously, the key driver for the project itself wasn't just governance, it was also the capability to have federated analytics and centralized analytics. And obviously the key thing about having the federated concept, especially when we have multiple sites, multiple roles happening across the organization, is that we're federating that accountability as well as the capability to drive these insights and so on. And again, the improved collaboration. So now we don't run the risk of somebody from HR in site A sharing and sending emails, which potentially have things like personally identifiable information to site D, that we've mitigated that, and that we've actually really solidified the governance going around that. And scalability. So as I said, this was kind of our first rollout for this particular customer, but the fact that the platform is in there now is going to enable other business functions or new sites as they become acquired to seamlessly integrate into this. And, you know, it's the capability to scale the platform as we need to in an agile fashion is really important. The reluctance to investigate AI models and so on is something now that we're addressing here with them. So the usage of large language models, and I think Paul touched off, it's been touched off every speaker in the webinar so far. Having the platform in place enables AI to be implemented in a compliant way, in a way that's going to be safe, that will be compliant with the EU Artificial Intelligence Act, among other things, as well as your own particular policies as well. And as I said, this will probably be the subject for a future webinar that we'll do about some of those use cases around artificial intelligence. They are real, they're here, and they're working at adding value. I mentioned document automation as one example. You know, the elimination of countless person hours reading simple documentation, which can be automated and fed back into a wider solution, is a really hot topic use case. It's just one example of many that can be potentially rolled out here. I'd just make one final pointer, because I know I need to wrap up, but I did mention on my previous slide there the concept of agility, because I can imagine, having looked at the totality of the webinar here, and we'll see maybe some of the questions that might come in, it seems like we're taking on a huge amount here, a lot of legislative overhead and responsibility for public sector organizations especially. And then, you know, we're looking at the requirements around governance and unified data platforms. But I would say, I would stress personally the opportunity that affords organizations, and I would stress as well the capability to do these things in an agile fashion. And just to that particular point, understanding the technology and understanding its value is a really important part of that. And one of the really good initiatives that Microsoft have put in place is a funding stream to enable organizations such as the public sector organizations that are on this particular webinar to realize or to do proof of value projects to understand what value the technology may bring. I think it's an excellent initiative by Microsoft. It's partner led, so organizations like ourselves can take you through that journey and help you in the understanding of how this technology might map to the sort of use cases and requirements and obligations that we've been talking about on the webinar thus far. But again, as I'm conscious of time, I need to wrap up. So thank you all very much, Darren, and I'm going to hand back to you, if you're there.
Thanks, William. I'm here indeed. Yes, I'm here. I'm just listening to your last slide there. Look, that's really a great case study, and just shows how everything kind of comes together. So thanks for presenting that. So just a quick note to people: we are going to do a Q&A. We've been seeing some interesting questions coming in here, so we're going to come to those in a couple of minutes. So I'm going to ask all of the speakers to sort of come back on camera for that. But just before we do the Q&A, just want to make some concluding remarks, because I'm conscious that not everyone will be able to stay for the Q&A. So first of all, you know, before people do leave, and we don't want you to leave, we want you to stay around, but in case you can't, I just want to thank all our speakers for the excellent and informative presentations. And I want to thank you, the audience, for your time, for attending today. We've seen an awful lot here today about the complexity and the risks involved in the regulatory and compliance environment, particularly in Paul Lavery's presentation, the sort of risks around regulatory fines and breaches. We've talked about barriers to progress, which William has outlined. You know, not having robust data governance in place creates those barriers. But equally, we want people to understand that these challenges, they exist, but they also represent what I would call an opportunity. It's an opportunity for those who are going to be prepared and who are able to take advantage of the tools that are available. The tools are available. The expertise is there to help. We're available to help. And as William said, Microsoft have put a very useful program in place which provides you with some funding to do proof of value, so that you can really take these tools and frameworks and see how they will apply and see how they will deliver value in your own organization in a real way rather than a theoretical way. So I'll leave you with the comment in terms of my concluding remarks to please do reach out to us for a conversation. As William said, it's partner led. So that's what we're all about, is helping our customers and prospective customers. Reach out, talk to us about how you might be able to leverage some of what you've seen here today, Microsoft Fabric, Microsoft Purview, get your organization into a data ready space. So I'm going to move across now just to the last sort of 10 minutes to do Q&A. We have quite a number of questions, so I think everybody's back on screen. Thanks, guys. I'm going to start with the first question here. I think this is a general question. Maybe you could take this one, William. How does it work if most of your data is on-prem? So is it extracted regularly, to the cloud or to one lake?
Yeah, so if we're talking about the extraction of the information from on-prem to, let's say, one lake, it depends, right? There's a couple of ways to skin that cat, so to speak. For example, what the mechanism to be able to extract the data out is. So there's things like gateways that we can install on-prem, which gives you a structured way of getting information out of your on-premise environment and into the cloud without you having to open up, let's say, ports on your network or your firewall, etc. It's a long established piece of technology that's there, and that does enable, for example, for something like, let's say, a Microsoft Fabric implementation, normally daily refreshes of information into that environment are usually sufficient. Although, if we have scenarios where we do need real-time reporting to on-premise resources, those are possible as well. And there's a whole range of ways to connect to that information. As Paul mentioned there, for example, it depends on what you're using, whether you've got SaaS, whether you've got, but in this case, we're talking about on-prem, if it's Oracle, if it's SAP, and so on. There's connectors available for those things. So again, there's no one simple answer to that, because there's kind of 100 different ways things can happen. It depends on the data source. It depends on your network policies. But one really important thing is everything that we said on this webinar, such as what Paul Norris had mentioned there, and I was talking about, is as we're extracting that, we'll be classifying that information. We'll be understanding it falls under the purview of the technology we've been talking about straight away from off the bat. So we'll understand the nature of that information, where the person identifiable information is. We'll be tracking in Purview, for example, if new fields are being added, like Paul was talking about, and that flagging that in the platform, but also then being able to drive insight throughout the entirety of the Fabric platform.
Thanks, William. Okay, so I've a little list of questions here, so I might point this one maybe at yourself, Paul Lavery, because you talked about the EU AI Act, and while it's called the AI Act, I certainly noted that it's very data focused. I have a question here. How can IT providers assist government bodies in complying with the EU AI Act? I mean, what's your view on that?
I think it's a really good question, first of all. And the question sometimes is, it arises from two scenarios. One is, well, what type of assistance can be got? And the other one is, could a public sector body effectively seek to outsource some of its obligations to IT providers? I would answer in the affirmative in the first instance. I think that not only would I say that you can get assistance from IT providers, I would go further than that and say you should get assistance from IT providers, because the IT providers will know an awful lot more about the IT systems that they have developed and facilitated deploying than the public sector bodies necessarily will. And there's two ways in which that assistance will be given. One way is that because the developers of AI systems themselves have obligations under the AI Act, compliance by those bodies and the publication of findings are going to be of assistance to the public sector. But then I think the second element is that, subject to one proviso, one can be asking appropriate questions of IT service providers, whether they're the developers of the IT AI systems or whether they're a service provider in relation to it. And they can be getting assistance in terms of classifying those AI systems. Are they high risk? Are they low risk? What type of risk is involved? And also then in terms of seeking services in relation to the categorization of the data that goes into those systems and having appropriate measures in place. So I think it's very much, and I think the AI Act itself envisages that there will be a lot of help from the IT sector, both those who develop AI systems and those who provide services in respect of them.
Great. Thanks, Paul. So engage is the message there, I think. Yeah, brilliant. So you mentioned classification. So I might go across to yourself, Paul Norris, from Microsoft, because there's a couple of questions coming in here on Purview. The first one is, what kind of roles in the NIS department or other department generally manage Purview? And the second question, which you probably want to take as well, is, this is a license related question. Does the entire organization need a the E5 license in order to implement Purview?
Okay, thank you. So on the first one on the roles, look, it's very much a shared responsibility, right? You could have regular IT roles that would usually deploy Purview and make sure that it's set up and ready for the organization to use. You then might have an IS data governance or compliance manager or someone that would take that view, who might then be the first one to go in and maybe set up the data catalog and maps in there, because they would understand both the data estate and maybe a little bit about the business concepts. But then you would normally try to bring in different SMEs in the business sectors in more of those steward roles that would then have the knowledge about what exactly is the data used for and the concepts behind it. So I very much lean back in that kind of federated model, but with IT support to maybe get the technology activated, deployed, and then bring in the other areas. On the licensing one, look, the best thing to do there is probably reach out to your partners or your account team. It can be a little bit complex. E5 is usually where people start. There are other licenses that get added on then sometimes if you need special features and functions. And the piece that I covered on the data governance of the data set side, that actually runs in Azure, and you simply pay as you go based on how you use it and what you add to it, right? So best thing is to do is engage the partners in the Microsoft team, and we'll work that out with you.
Sure. There's one more Purview related question here, Paul, which is, could you elaborate on the role of Purview in enhancing data transparency and accountability in public sector organizations?
Sure. I'm gonna try and make an assumption on maybe what that means, right? So what certainly Purview can do is it can show you very clearly what you have within your data estate. A lot of organizations, public sector kind of is just one of them, private also. Honestly, sometimes they don't fully understand what they have, where it exists, and how it aligns to maybe their obligations. So in a first instance, Purview can simply help you to see what you have. You then combine with it with maybe the obligations you're trying to comply with. That could be basic departmental file plans, retention policies. It could be obligations under your privacy policies. And then from a transparency perspective, if you have that certainty of you know what you have in your estate, and you're very clearly able to say, I have put in place proper retention policies and I'm enforcing them, you can then give a fairly confident statement to your stakeholders, citizens or others in the department, to say, this is my estate, I have mapped it, it is up to date, it is accurate, and I believe I've enforced the retention policies and file plans I'm required to do. So it does help you in that kind of almost auditability perspective of you now have a place where you can go and you can demonstrate to people you are trying to be compliant, and you've reports as well built into Purview that can show you are trying to do that. So it certainly helps you from that perspective of demonstrating how you're trying to be compliant.
That's great, Paul. So I've one or two more general questions. William, I might go over to you for these. We have about 3 minutes left. One is, how can Fabric assist organizations in managing their AI strategy? And the second one, so I won't interrupt you, would be, considering the complexities of everything you talked about, data integration, fragmentation, how do you recommend organizations approach the deployment of Fabric to provide better insights while remaining on the right side of compliance?
So maybe I'll take the second one first.
Yep.
So the approach towards deploying Fabric. So I would say let's start out in an agile way. take the small steps first and do your proofs of value. So understand the problems that you're trying to solve. So something I was trying to get across with the case study that we talked about there, there's specific problems that we know we have, and there's a range of them. We can't solve them all in one big bang. We can make incremental progress, and that's really important. So, and then start doing things the correct way, so that when we do that, things scale properly. What I talked about at the beginning of my first presentation there was, if things are fragmented and we have Oracle over here and SAP on-prem over there and something else over there, and we're trying to make all those systems talk to each other and then try and get our insights from that, becomes just unscalable. So we design our fabric in a way that we can prove the scalability is there. And I'd probably come back just on this particular point to say that, investigate that funding stream that Microsoft has made available. Try it before you buy it, kind of thing. Let's put it out there, see what happens when, you should see the value very quickly when you start to unify your data sets into your Fabric workspace. Because generally speaking, and to my knowledge, certainly all of our customers and a lot of the organizations on this webinar are Microsoft customers that are already using the Microsoft Cloud in some form or other. So this is not a huge philosophical jump towards that. Just in terms of how your Fabric deployment can assist your AI strategy. So again, going back to the very first presentation, you have to understand what's being used to train your AI models. It's critical. So understanding the lineage of, let's take an example of, we've integrated an AI model with a system to do that use case I was talking about, which is the automation of the document heavy lifting that human beings are doing at the moment. And that the data for that has gone through a whole bunch of changes. There's just documents involved, but there's also structured data involved. We need to understand what that data was, where it came from. Did it change at any point across the life cycle of that? You really have to have something like that unified data platform to be able to be sure that that you're training your models correctly in a compliant way, so that when you start to realize the value, you're on a solid platform.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that came across really well in all the presentations, to be honest, the link between being data ready and AI ready. Look, William, thanks very much. Okay, we didn't quite get to every question, but we are out of time. I'm conscious people have other meetings to go to, I'm sure. So I want to wrap up. I want to again say thank you to our three speakers for excellent presentations and really insightful overviews. I want to thank the participants for attending. Thanks everybody. And I just want to reiterate the points. We've highlighted risks today, but hopefully you'll see that we've highlighted opportunities. So reach out, get in touch with us. As William said, it's partner led. We can help. Microsoft will support this as well. So reach out to us, get in touch, and we'll have more conversations. But for today, it's thank you, everyone, and goodbye.